Genesis chapter number 1, I'll just read verse number 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And tonight, Lord willing, we will begin our Bible survey. Went through the book of Genesis. And Lord willing, we'll look at a brief survey of the first 11 chapters. This will answer a question that people have is, how did things get the way that they are? Sometimes after something bad happens, people will pause and say, how did things get this bad? How did things get to the way that they are? Well, the Bible tells us how things got the way they are and how we came to the world that we know, because it hasn't always been this way. The book of Genesis, as the name tells us, of course, is a book of beginnings. It's a book of origins. It's a book about how things started. And God opens up the book by telling us how things got the way that they are. And things haven't always been evil and wicked and terrible, and there hasn't always been tragedy upon the earth. But God graciously has revealed to us how things got started. The world is very different than it was from the first 11 chapters in the book of Genesis. So this book itself covers a long period of time, the book of Genesis does. It covers 2,369 years. You don't really think that much time is covered in the book of Genesis, but 2,300 years from the first chapter to the last chapter. So that's a lot of time. The rest of the Old Testament, so if you go from Exodus to the end of the Malachi, only covers 1,238 years. So the book of Genesis, in time-wise, covers twice as much as the rest of the Old Testament does. In fact, the first 11 chapters of the book covers a period of time of 2,000 years. So it's a long time. Sometimes you think, well, how did all this stuff happen real quick? Well, you have to remember that this happens over a period of 2,000 years. So that is a long period of time, just in the first 11 chapters. And it's a long time to cover in 30 minutes tonight. But Lord willing, I'm going to try to give you a brief story of who we are and how we got here. And that's what the first 11 chapters tell us. I believe in the literal meaning of the first 11 chapters of Genesis. You know, we previously studied that God's Word is inspired, it is inerrant, it is infallible, it is authoritative, and it is sufficient. So now that we begin to actually study the Bible, we have to take those truths with us. And we can't leave them at the beginning and then go off and say, now that we've got past those introductory statements, now let's talk about how we can fit evolution into Genesis. Now, some people will affirm those things that we believe about the Bible. They say, yeah, I believe that the Bible is infallible and inerrant, but then they'll want to talk about millions of years, because that's not 6 24-hour days is not sophisticated enough. You know, and they'll try to decide that they can't really believe the Bible in light of today's science and scholarship. But as Martin Luther is attributed as saying, you know, people should grant the Holy Spirit the honor of being more learned than you are. And that's what people try to do. They try to think that they're more learned than the blessed Holy Spirit who gave us this inspired word. So as we affirmed the inerrancy and the infallibility of Scripture, so we take it with us when we open the first page of the book. And if we do that, we'll be fine as far as what the Bible tells us. The book of Genesis is the book of beginnings. Genesis tells the story, how we got here, and how and who we are. So in the beginning, we read, God created the heaven and the earth. God created the world and everything in it. And there's a profound simplicity in the creation account as we read it here. A sovereign majesty and dignity in God's creation. But it's also awe-inspiring and humbling power. You know, there was no guile here. There was no deception. There was no creation through corruption. But just clear and majestic commands to come forth. God created the basis of the universe with light and firmament and land and sea. And he beautified what he created with the creation of the sun and the moon and the fish and the birds and the land animals and man. And he did all this in 6 24-hour days. God created light and heavens and earth and water and land and sun and moon and stars. And God tells us it was all very good. Now, man has always had creation myths to explain the beginning. All you have to do is ask, well, when did that start? Even today, people will talk about, well, the Big Bang. Okay, what started the Big Bang? There has to be a beginning point somewhere along the line. There has to be, well, what caused that? So, well, there's a Big Bang. Well, what caused the bang? Where did the bang come from? And on and on. So there's always been within man a way to invent something that started it all. Even now, scientists who claim to be naturalists invent their own myths. And the ancient myths and the myth of the Big Bang, the ancients had myths of tyrant gods and depraved gods bringing the world into existence by vile actions and deception and all those acts of chaos that brought about order. Our scientists today say there was chaos and explosions and disorder that brought about order. The Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians and the Babylonians all had vile, wicked gods who brought the world into existence by vile and wicked actions. And the depraved man invented depraved stories to tell how the world got here. But I like what Jim Hamilton wrote in his book. He said, the description of the creation order is orderly. These give the account an epic beauty, a simple elegance, a style that's matched the grandeur described. When set next to other ancient accounts of creation of the world and humanity, the Genesis account is aglow with power and goodness and purity and the uniqueness of the God revealed in the Bible. He is responsible for all that is good. Genesis 1 and 2 show God to be glorious indeed. And I just thought about that, how just the simplicity and the awesome majesty of the Genesis account, that God spoken into existence. There was no struggle with God. There was nothing that moved God to have to do this, but God, in his own power, by his own will, made everything and made it good. Just spoken into his existence. God is good in creation. And that's what Genesis 1 and 2 tells us. That God is good, and he created good. And everything that he made was good. Well, on the sixth day, he created man, and made man in his own image. This man, to whom was breathed the breath of life, was given dominion over the earth, to cultivate it, to keep it as a steward. But Adam was alone, and this was not good. So you have God created and it was good. God created and it was good. Adam was alone and that was not good, God tells us. It's not good for man to be alone. So from Adam's side, from his rib, he made a woman. And he created woman to be a helper suitable for him. So God created man. He created woman. He created marriage. God created gender. And this was created out of his wisdom and his goodness. The roles of men and women and the gender distinctions that God gives men and women were created for our good. That is the goodness of God, that he created us differently. And he created us differently physically and mentally and emotionally, and it was for our good that he did that. And all there was good and blessedness in the Garden of Eden. Adam had his wife, Adam had his home, Adam had his mission, he had his job in the service of the Lord, and all was very good and without sin and without the curse that sin had brought. Adam had been placed as the federal head of all mankind and had been given the perfect situation for him to live in. No other person had ever had such a perfect situation to live in. And when God placed Adam there as the head of all humanity, God placed him in the perfect situation to live in. Adam had been placed there in a garden of yes, with only one no. The only thing that he couldn't do was eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because in that day, he would die. But then, So early in the book, in chapter 3, we find trouble. So early on, in this perfect setting with Adam and his perfect garden. Adam with the role to dress and to keep the garden and to protect his wife, protect the garden, to keep it up and to watch over it. And Eve to be his helper. And they were to live together as one flesh and to populate the earth and take dominion over the earth and to expand for the glory of God. So early on, the dragon comes into play. The dragon, the serpent, the devil, came to Eve. Already the dragon came to usurp God's natural order. He didn't go to Adam, but he went to Eve. And here was his strategy from the beginning, was to usurp the authority and the order that God had already set up. And the dragon came and subtly to Eve and tempted her to doubt God's word, to doubt God's goodness. God doesn't want you to have your best because he's keeping things from you. And he knows when you partake of that fruit that you're going to become God, like God's, and he's keeping good things from you. He's keeping the best from you. You can't trust him. And he tempted her. And Eve ate. Well, Adam, as the head, came to her and she told him what she had done. And Adam, not out of deception and not out of trickery or guile, but Adam just rebelled. Adam, in rebellion and unbelief, grabbed the fruit and partook. This is the death, the beginning of death. Adam's eyes were opened, and they did know sin. They did know evil now. When they partook of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, they knew evil now. But they knew it experientially. They knew it because they were now sinners. They didn't know it in a philosophical sense, but now they know it in the sense of experiencing it. And now they were in God's presence, and before they had walked in the God's presence in great joy, but now they are naked, and know they're naked, and now they're ashamed. And they go and they hide themselves from God. Well, God called for Adam and confronted Adam in his sin. And neither Adam or Eve would own up to their sin. They both tried to blame somebody else. And God called them on it. And they both were pushing the blame elsewhere. And God proclaimed the guilt. So early on, in chapter number 3, you already have the ruin of God's good creation. At this point, God would have been just to crush Adam and Eve, to wipe out this earth, and to be done with the whole thing. God would have been just with his creation rising up in rebellion against him so early on in his creation. He announced a curse was going to be brought upon the serpent, though. God did not, in his long-sufferingness, did not destroy the universe as he justly could have, but he announced a curse first on the serpent. He'd be the most despised creature and crawl on his belly and eat the dust all of his days. God pronounced a curse brought upon the woman. God had commanded Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply and replenish and to fill the earth. Now, in order to fulfill that task, it was going to be difficult for Eve. She's no longer wants to be the helper that God created her to be. But now she'll want to rule over her husband. And feminism was born. The curse of sin. She won't want to submit to the natural order that God had created her to. So what she naturally has been created for is going to be hard for her now, just to live in that subjection. She's going to experience great pain in childbirth as she seeks to do what God has called her to do. That was the curse of sin. Adam was charged to keep the garden, and now the earth is cursed, making labor not to be a joy but sorrow, and a curse that was brought upon mankind. So in all aspects of life, and in everything God had commanded them to do, now it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for Adam and Eve to live together as two sinners. It's going to be difficult for Eve women to have children and for men to provide. All things now that God has commanded first for good and for joy are now going to be difficult because of the curse. And here we have the entrance of death, pain and suffering. And this is the beginning of the world we know because of sin. So that's the beginning of sin. That's the beginning of the curse. That's the beginning of pain and suffering. It's the beginning of death. But we also have another beginning there in Genesis 3:15. That's something called the proto-evangel. Genesis 3:15. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. In the first pronouncement of the first curse of the serpent, God gave the first gospel message. And when he said that he would put enmity between the serpent and the woman, the serpent will bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. The message there that there would be a son born of the seed of the woman. So the first thing that God shows is he's not going to destroy them immediately, as he very well could have if he had chose to. God was not going to destroy them immediately, but there was going to be some long-sufferingness there. That the serpent was going to be judged. That God was going to get the serpent for what he has done. So that was something that Adam and Eve looked to. But also, there was going to be somebody to come to fix it. Adam lost everything. He ruined it. But God gives a promise that somebody is going to come and he's going to undo what the dragon had done. That the dragon had come and defeated them, but somebody's going to come along and he's going to put it to the dragon. That he didn't win. That serpent did not win. That somebody's going to come and he's going to fix it. He's going to make things right. See, God gave justice to the serpent with no hope of salvation or forgiveness. That was it. You sin, you're doomed. But God showed mercy to humanity by not destroying them immediately and promising a future salvation for a people who neither deserved it nor asked for it. Adam didn't ask for mercy. Eve didn't ask for mercy. They just said, well, it wasn't my fault. I didn't do it. It was their fault. Or God, it was your fault. It was the woman you gave me. But God promised mercy and salvation to people who didn't deserve it and people who wouldn't even ask for it. It was the promise of the deliverer, a male child, the seed of the woman. Not the seed of the man, but the seed of the woman. And here, early on, there was something odd about this, something strange about this. It's not the seed of the man, but it was the seed of the woman. And from her, there is a promise deliverer. So in faith, Adam and Eve hoped for that promised deliverer. But also in their sin, the judgment has come in. And God expels them from the garden. He blocks the entrance from the garden, and he makes a coat of skin to cover their nakedness and to hide their shame. They were naked and ashamed, so they covered themselves with fig leaves. Well, God takes and slays an animal in the first sacrifice and takes the skin of the animal and covers their shame. He covers their sin. He covers their shame that they are in. So here in the first sin, we find the first gospel promise. That there is one day someone who's going to come and save them and deliver them. Well, they're cast out of the garden where they had fellowship, and now they walk out into a fallen world, so different from the one that they had created. Can you imagine the beauty and the splendor of the garden, and then they're being cast out? And there, where they had once walked with God and fellowshiped with God, there's that cherubim that was there, and they walked out into the world. And I don't know how fast everything changed. I don't know if immediately the thorns started to grow, but there was they had to have known the stark difference. Just the fact that the knowledge of evil and the depravity that was now in them. What a sad thought that is to see them walking out covered and guilty of their sin. Well, Adam and Eve have children. And then the children that they have carry over that sin nature. that serpent there's an enmity there between the seed of the woman and the serpent's seed. And the seed in the very first offspring that we read of Adam and Eve, and Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel went to offer sacrifices to God as where it was instructed. And Cain offered the works of his hands. So Cain was working, he offered the works of his hand, but Abel brought a blood sacrifice. Now this wasn't something that they just came up with on their own. I believe that God had instructed them, or maybe Adam had instructed them on how to properly worship and sacrifice unto God. And Cain, who the Bible tells us in 1 John was the seed of the serpent, rose up and murdered his brother. We see the results of Adam's fall. We have the first murder. That man can't worship correctly, and murder is in his heart. So quickly in the story, we find that man is full of murder and full of idolatry. Cain hated his brother because his own works were evil, and his brother's works were righteous. That's what 1 John tells us. That we find a natural hatred for God in humanity. A natural hatred is evident here. That Cain despised the works of righteousness. He despised the picture of a blood sacrifice. He despised his brother for doing righteous works and God accepting his sacrifice, not because it was the works of his hands, but because it was a sacrifice of blood. And Cain hated that so much that he rose up and murdered his brother. Cain is judged by being separated from the presence of God, and he goes off into the land of Nod. Well, Eve, I believe, hoped that Abel would be the one of deliverance. And the Bible tells us she had another child named him Seth. Now, Seth is an interesting word. It's an interesting name. It means, depending on what dictionary that you read, but it's basically substitute. It's put in, or like put in place of. So the general gist of it is that he was substituted. He was given as another. He was appointed, or he was put. So instead of Abel, God gave her Seth. And I believe that this is pointing to a substitute. That it wasn't Abel that was of the seed of the woman. It wasn't Abel that was going to destroy the serpent. And then she named him Seth, saying, well, maybe he will be the one. Because she already had children. She already had a son. She already had a son in Cain. It wasn't that she only had one son all of her life. But I believe that this was to take the place of hopefully the one that would come. And Seth was the substitute that God had given them. So early on we see the need of a substitute. Well, Cain has his family, and he goes off. And Seth has his family. And they're on two different paths. And this is something else that you see over and over again. A separation between God's people and the people of the world. Well, generations go on and on and on. The world gets more and more wicked. And in Genesis 6, in verse 5, it says, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And he repented to the Lord that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and creeping things, and the fowls of the air. And in verse number 11 it says, the earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his ways upon the earth. So God said, so in 120 years, God declared judgment was coming. So when God said he was going to destroy the earth, we find that it was 120 years before that happened, as it says in Genesis 3:6, or 6:3 rather. What a long-suffering God. That God saw that the whole earth was full of wickedness, and yet he delays judgment, delays in our way of accounting things, but it happened just as God had planned. But God still had a remnant. God still had a remnant in the godly line of Seth. So if we think about it here, God sent Adam and Eve out to populate the earth, and they did. They did what God had told them. But Adam had wrecked everything, and he had passed his nature on now to everybody. And now the whole earth is not giving glory to God, but the whole earth is corrupt, and the whole earth is wicked, and the whole earth is naturally against the things of God. So they went out to try to do what God had commanded them to do, and to populate the earth. And when they did, it was tainted by sin. That sin had affected everything. And now you have a whole world that is corrupt and wicked and evil, just in the depths of depravity. So of all humanity, you just have one line, one little family that kept on following after God. And there was one man named Noah who found grace in the eyes of the Lord. We're not talking about now a nation or a group of people. We're talking about one family now. One man. Noah was a man of faith who trusted in the Lord because the Lord showed him mercy. God would not destroy all flesh, but God would save Noah and his family. God had a remnant who did not follow after the iniquity of their heart, but trusted in him and had faith in him. Well, God told Noah what he was going to do and told him to build an ark. And an ark means a box. So it doesn't look like the boats in the Sunday school pictures with the giraffes sticking their head out the window. It was a big barge looking thing. It was a box. And told him how to build it and how big to build it and why to build it. We went to the Creation Museum in Cincinnati, and they had one room that was built to scale in the ark, and it was probably as big as this auditorium. And they had a picture of that room where it would look like on the ark, and it was amazing that this room would just be a small little tiny part of that big ark. It's huge if you map it out. And he told him how to build it and why to build it. And he told him that he was going to destroy everything living that walked upon the earth and breathed air. And God would spare his family. He said he would spare animals, 2 of every kind and 7 of the clean animals. And God established this covenant with Noah that they would not perish. There was a covenant first before Noah even believed. God had already established the covenant with Noah, what he was going to do, and just told him what he was going to do. Well, God commanded Noah to do that, and Noah did everything God told him to. When he was 600 years old, Noah and his family entered into the ark. The ark was a place of refuge, a place of safety, and all who entered in were saved from God's judgment. Noah had preached and Noah had warned, and he told them the judgment of God was coming. But the people on the earth ignored him. And they went about their business like there was nothing wrong, or there was nothing that was going to happen. They ignored it. Well, you're crazy, Noah. You're crazy. The whole world disagrees with you, Noah. Nothing's going to happen. And Noah built the ark, and he built and he built, and he preached and he built and he preached, and everybody just was eating and drinking, getting married, planning for the future, planting crops, planning families, all kinds of different things they were doing as Noah and his family walked into the ark. And people went about their parties and their lives, and God shut the door of the ark. And people went on laughing and doing all the evil thoughts they had in their mind. And God sealed the ark. And then it began to rain. I don't think it had ever rained before. I don't believe it had rained at this time. And now the water started falling from the sky. And this was no afternoon shower, but the heavens were opened. And I believe the water shut up and burst forth from the earth. And for 40 days, nonstop, the waters poured from the heavens. And the waters increased and increased and increased until the entire earth was covered in water. No mere local flood, but above the highest peak, the whole earth was covered, and everything that breathed the breath of life was destroyed. All in whose nostrils was the breath of life, and all that was in the dry land died. And every living substance was destroyed which was on the face of the earth, or face of the ground, both man and cattle and creeping things and fowl of the heaven. And they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And in Genesis 7:24, and The waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. What a sad, somber thought that is. Imagine the death. Imagine the destruction. Imagine the consequences of sin. You know, it wasn't just that they went for a little joyride or a little boat ride. But you imagine how the ark must have rocked and how they must have gone back and forth and to and fro and wondered what was happening outside and wondering how, thinking about what they had lost and thinking about what the earth was going to be like whenever they got out and thinking about the consequences of sin. But they didn't just hop out. The flood caused such damage and such destruction to the earth. And not to mention the whole world was filled with water. And while they waited for the waters to abate, and they finally stepped out of the ark and onto dry land, which they hadn't seen in some time. What a different world they saw. You know, we thought about Adam walking out of the garden into a different world that he didn't know. Think about Noah stepping out of that ark into a different world. What a solemn moment. Consider the death and the destruction of the flood. This is the judgment of God. This was not just a story, but this is the judgment of God coming upon the earth. Everyone that Noah had ever spoken to outside of his family was dead. Every person Noah had ever seen, dead. Every person that Noah had preached to, dead. Every person that Noah had pleaded with, that judgment was coming, dead. Think of the massive destruction that was upon the earth and the devastation of just the whole earth, what it looked like. It was a different place. You know, we know that there mountains were formed and canyons were made, and maybe even the continents were formed at this time. That maybe the earth was one mass, and then as the water burst forth, the continents were created. We're talking about major changes to the landscape. In fact, man was not allowed to eat meat, and man was a vegetarian up to this point. And then God established here, after the flood, that man was now allowed to eat meat, probably because the climate was forever changed, and then the plant life was different. So not only was everybody gone, now they didn't eat the same way, the climate was different, everything was changed. And in this, God, again, shows his mercy. Before the flood, men lived hundreds of years. You know, Noah lived hundreds, Methuselah, 969 years. People were living into their 900s. But after this, people steadily lived shorter and shorter. That if you look at the genealogies after the flood, the lifespan got shorter and shorter and shorter until eventually it got down to where we're at right now. So whatever happened there, climate-wise, and probably with bacteria and so forth, and disease started coming in, and the lifespan started decreasing after this. Everything was changed. But God showed mercy yet again and commanded Noah to go and to live again, to go and to replenish the earth. Though the earth was cleansed, wickedness was still in the human heart. So here was like a restart. God told Adam and Eve to populate the earth, and they did, and it became wicked, totally wicked. So now God destroys everything except this remnant. And he says, all right, go replenish the earth. And what happens? Wickedness is the wicked human heart. Ham, because of his wickedness, goes and is cursed, and his family is cursed. And then we have the line of the Canaanites, and all over again we start. We have the wicked line of the generous men. Through the children and their families, the earth was being populated yet again, just as before. And just as before, because of the sinfulness of man's heart, people have enmity towards God. the earth was being populated, and it was all of one language. There were no barriers of language to slow and to impede progress. And they all came together to build a tower up to heaven. And again, we find the heart of humanity was upon wickedness. You see the same pattern over and over in this, that man doesn't want to follow after God. Man wants to worship the way they want to worship. Man hates the true and the righteous God. Man hates following after him. And we see the same pattern. We see the same wickedness in Cain, who would not worship God the way that God was to be worshipped. And here again we find the people upon the earth would not worship God the way they wanted the way God would be worshipped. They wanted to work their way into heaven. So they all came together. And they all had an idea. They all had a way of progress. And the way of false worship and the way of false gods. The way of self-righteousness. They were going to work their way up to heaven. So think about this. Just so many generations after the flood, the people were set again on wickedness. You would think that after so many times that man would learn, but that's just a proof that man can't learn. The man is naturally bent towards wickedness because they were living in times, well, even in Noah's time. If you study that out, Adam almost lived to Noah's time, or he may have lived to it. That certainly Noah's father and Adam were alive at the same time. We're talking people living 1,000 years old. These generations overlap, so they were one generation away from the fall, where Adam could have told them, this is what it was like, and this is what happened, and yet they dove right into their iniquity, and the flood occurred. And then right after that, you had the same kind of thing, that people were not too far removed from the flood itself, and yet they still continue into their wickedness. So God confounded the language of the people, giving them each and instantly a new language, and they couldn't communicate one with another. So the people who spoke one language before are now confounded. So you had one group of people that spoke one language, and they went one direction. And they had another people who spoke another language, and they went another direction. And that's naturally what would happen. If I spoke English, and only one other person in here spoke English, I know who I'd be talking to after the services. And if half the people spoke Chinese and the other half spoke French, we would naturally gravitate to the people we could understand. And that's what happened here. God confounded the language. You had different language groups, and so people who all spoke one language, they stayed together. And people who spoke another language, they stayed together. And then that's where you got the nations, and that's where you got what we call races, where you got all the people who spoke a certain thing went one way, and of course they married one with another. And so if you have a whole group of people that were dark complected that started having babies together, well, you got a whole group of people with dark colored skin and so forth. So this is how God separated and how God created the nations. And it shows how the nations were divided. Here at Babel, we see the beginning of the world system. Mystery Babylon, Babel, confusion. From Genesis all the way to Revelation, we find this world system. The book of Revelation speaks of this mystery, ancient Babylon. It's confusion. It's a system of the world that is in religion opposed to God. It's a religion that continues on in the system that's even active today. It's the world system of Antichrist. It's the world system of Babel. It's mankind united together in one religion that is opposed to God. And here we are. This is how we got to the world that we are. This is how we got to the world that we know. The world is a much different place than it was from the Garden of Eden. A pristine paradise of communion with God. Nothing but blessings. But now we find a corrupted, cursed, fallen world of hate and of murder, of sin and the consequences of sin. It's a lot different now than it is from the Garden of Eden, but really, other than technology, it's not any different now than it was in the days of the Tower of Babel. Because men aren't any different now. You say, yeah, but we have phones and cars. The only difference is technology. Men are still sinners. Men are still wicked. Men still love and to follow after a system of works righteousness. And men still hate God and His Word.
Amen.
In fact, we're living in times like right before the flood. People say, well, back in those primitive days, people were like that. There's no such thing as primitive days. That's an evolutionary term. There was no such thing as primitive days. Adam was probably smarter than everyone in this room. If you lived for 900 years, you could learn quite a few things. And besides, Adam was born, and God had given him a mind our minds are corrupted by the fall and by depravity. But these people weren't primitive people. They weren't caveman types of people. They were probably smarter than we were. And apart from technology, they're exactly the same as we are. And Jesus said at the end of the last days, that men would live like they do in the days of Noah. And that's how we live. You go out and tell people judgment is coming. They don't care. They won't listen. They won't heed the word. And they keep going further and further into depravity and wickedness. This is how we got here. Why is there sin? Why do we have a whole list full of people that we pray for every Wednesday? Because of sin. God didn't create it this way. Death and sickness and struggle and trial came in because of sin. Why is it that there are different languages? Why is it there's wars in different nations and people are always striving against each other? Because of sin. Why is it that the world is divided and there's never going to be peace upon the earth? Why? Because that ancient Babylon system. The only thing that man could get together on is that they didn't like God and they didn't like worshiping the true God. That is why we live in the world that we live in. Why do we have only so few days to live upon the earth? Because of sin. What does this tell us? It tells us that judgment is coming. It tells us the promises are sure both for salvation and forgiveness and the wrath to come. But it also tells us that there is someone coming. So as you read that book, and you get to chapter number 11, you think, well, this is how we got here. This is why the world is the way that it is. But what it does is it sets the table, is that there's someone coming. Because way back, he said that the seed of the woman, there was going to be a deliverer. And you read of the failings, you think, oh no, here it comes. It's going to be destroyed. But no, there's that promise out there. That promise of that deliverer. And that forms the foundation of the entire Word of God. That Adam and Eve looked in faith to that one to come. And that promise was passed on to Seth and to Seth's lineage and to Enoch and to Methuselah and to Lamech and to Noah and to Noah's children to look for that one who was to come. That first gospel message. That one is to come that's going to fix everything. Because God told Adam to go out and to have the whole earth and replenish the earth or fill the earth, that the whole earth would be glorifying God. And Adam ruined it. But there was one to come who was going to fix it, who was going to turn it all around. And so the book of beginnings gives us the beginning of sin, the beginning of death, the beginning of judgment, the beginning of nations, the beginning of ancient Babylon, the beginnings of the seed of the serpent. But most importantly, it gives us the beginnings of that gospel promise. It gives us that first promise looking forward the Lord Jesus Christ. And Lord bless the preaching of His Word. We'll be discussing.